Tonight, you arrive in sun-bleached Acre, the great Crusader port of the Holy Land, in the year 1190, a Templar Quartermaster overseeing ledgers, seals, and supply convoys in a city balanced uneasily between faith and war. If you enjoy this gentle journey, please consider subscribing. It helps us make more narrations like this one. Now take a deep breath, get comfortable, and feel the still air press close, thick with parchment dust and secrets that no Crusader dares to name. You arrive to Acre on the Bay of Haifa, where the shoreline curves like a shallow bowl, and the city sits at the cusp of water and dust. It is the year 1190, the height of the Third Crusade, when the armies of Christendom, led by Richard of England, Philip of France, and the Emperor's men from the German lands, have come to retake the Holy Land from Saladin. Acre, the great port now known as Acre on the coast of modern Israel, has become their prize and their lifeline. Whoever holds this harbor holds the road to Jerusalem. 2 harbors hold the world here, a tighter inner basin shielded by masonry and a broader outer roadstead where ships ride at anchor, hulls cushioned by fenders and rope bumpers. Between the masts and the walls, camps sprawl in uneven belts, Franks, Germans, and men from England, tents staked between scrub and thorn, cook fires banking ash in the noon glare. You are a Templar Quartermaster, a brother of the Knights Templar, the military order founded nearly a century ago to guard pilgrims and defend the holy sites. Your charge is not swordplay, but the quiet governance of supply, the ledgers, seals, and convoys that keep the crusade breathing. Around you the siege is present, but so is trade. Boatmen call in Arabic to pilots from Tyre, a Pisan factor argues in Italian over key dues, and a Greek broker tallies freight in a mixture of tongues that balances as surely as a set of scales. Dust rises from mule trains coming down from the Galilee with sacks of barley and rough wine, and it settles on armor as readily as on wicker baskets of figs. You walk the wharf counting planks and barrels, marking in your mind the crooked lines of commerce and faith that bind armies together. The heat presses without drama, and the work continues because it must. The city half market stall, half earthwork, both built upon compromise. You move between the Templars' storehouses and the counting room as if between the lungs of a single body, one chamber inhaling goods and the other exhaling numbers. The order you serve began around the year 1119 to guard the roads to Jerusalem, and for years your brothers held their house on the Temple Mount until the city fell in 1187. Now you operate from coastal footholds where ships can reach you faster than horsemen. In your chest you carry the memory of the seal you stamp. 2 riders sharing 1 horse, a sign of vowed poverty, while your hands inventory bales, bolts, and coin that would buy a town in Champagne. On the far side of the street, the Hospitallers run their infirmaries with clean linen and vinegar, and they marshal their own knights when the horns sound. They answer to the same pope, but court the same patrons, and the competition is polite until it is not. You count this too: influence, favors, promised chapels, and the weight of a donor's conscience measured in silver. The coins that pass your scales are a mix: French deniers and Tournois tourneeses from the west, gold Byzants that spend easily in Levantine markets, and the occasional German piece whose fineness you test with your teeth only when no one watches. Italian factors bring letters that move money faster than caravans. Bills of exchange written in a merchant's hand that let you claim silver in Acre for pledges posted in Pisa or Venice. You cross the docks with a slate and a stick of wax, and the ledger in your satchel grows heavier, though the pages are thin. Ships from Venice, Pisa, and Genoa arrive with familiar rhythms. Hulls square and broad, sterns high, sails patched but serviceable, and the crewmen bargaining in a mixture of prayer and arithmetic. You watch casks of salted meat roll down a gangplank beneath a sun-bleached banner, crates of crossbow bolts stacked like cordwood, hides and iron bars, and a barrel of pitch whose bung weeps and marks the deck with a dark tear. Cargoes outbound flow the other way, woolens unsold in the heat, letters to lords and sometimes a knight who has seen enough, and you check seals on every package that names your house. Mule trains from the Galilee arrive splayed and dusty, bells muffled, drivers speaking Arabic that you understand well enough to measure load and time, and you shake hands with a broker who smells of cumin and ink. In the shouting on the quay, you hear prices, oaths, and a worrying note of ease when a Venetian promises to smooth a passage for a fee that has no column in your books. Today you find 2 bales whose cords are impressed with a matrix not your own, an oval seal that pretends to be a temple but lacks the riders. A novice swore he checked them, and yet the wax tells you he did not. You hold the numbers as you would a fence in high wind, steadying them where they want to sag into rumour. Guy of Lusignan presses his claim as king, haranguing men who will follow him if ships carry their pay. To the north, Conrad of Montferrat keeps Tyre hard and unyielding, a hinge that does not creak. Inside the walls, an Ayyubid garrison answers to Saladin, and beyond your lines his banners ripple on the hills, his army pressing the ring that presses the city, each side tightening where the other loosens. Between the camps, the hospitallers' tents stand white and orderly, their infirmaries a world of water and order, and theirs is a discipline different from yours, but relentless in its own ledger of bandages and bread. You meet their quartermaster at the edge of the market, and he weighs your courtesy while you weigh his silence. Both of you hint at missing bolts of mail and cases of quarrels that should have come and did not. In a stall near the fishmonger's, you find a sword of Western make with the maker's mark you logged last week, and the vendor smiles a little too quickly when you ask the price. A Venetian broker takes you aside and speaks of facilitation to avoid Ayyubid inspections by way of quiet payments, and the word facilitation drifts into your notebook as a number that does not balance with any lawful fee. You return to the counting room because numbers confess where tongues do not. The benches are plain, the shutters half closed against glare, and the air smells of ink, tallow, and oiled leather. Here your world resolves into columns, arrivals, disbursements, and the small notations that keep memory from lying. You weigh coin on brass pans, deniers clinking in ribs of 10, bezants flashing soft yellow that sticks to the eye, and you scrape a few to test for gilded fraud, your knife taking a curl of charm from the base metal beneath. Bills of exchange arrive folded and sealed, the script neat and dispassionate, and you note how easily a signature can substitute for a mule train, how a promise can travel where a wagon cannot. In the margins you trace seal impressions with your thumb, and on 3 shipments the wax is missing or smeared so badly it might as well be missing. The dates match nothing you remember receiving, yet the totals align too neatly, as if written by a man who hasn't lifted a bale. You find line items labeled harbor surcharge that recur on days with no surcharge posted by the city, and you set a pebble on that page to hold your place while you fetch the port roll to compare. When you look up, a senior brother stands in the doorway, and his eyes take in your pebbles and knife and scales. He asks no question you can answer openly, and you understand that the figures before you touch more than theft. They touch a kind of peace that lives only if it is not named. You go back out into the afternoon because ledgers alone do not move wagons, and wagons shape whether tents hold or fall. The city's plan is simple when seen from the hill. The harbour curves, the walls knit bastion to bastion, and the camps lie like blankets set out to dry. Yet from the ground it is a maze of alleys where Arabic mixes with French, Greek, and Italian, until words feel like coin that has passed through too many hands. You pass a hospitaller line carrying stretchers, and you nod to their sergeant who counts his charges without moving his lips. Even here, arithmetic sits behind the eyes. At a corner where rope makers stretch tarred lines to dry, you pause to watch a factor from Genoa write a note that will conjure silver in Tyre against gold deposited weeks ago in Liguria. And you think how paper can erase distance in a way horses cannot. A boy from Provence brings you tallies scratched on a shard of pottery, and you translate them into ink while he chews a strip of dried quince. Together you make an army walk by writing its steps ahead of it. In every movement you feel the pairing that defines Acre, devotion that chants from chapels at dusk, and commerce that underwrites the chant with ledgers and weights, each keeping the other alive under a sky that cares for neither. The day begins with numbers and fibres, and you take your seat at the long table where the order's books live. Parchment quires, stitched into a thick cartulary, lie open beneath your hand, their margins lined with cautious notes from years of campaigns. Iron gall ink darkens to near black as you write, but the morning's sea damp makes it shine wetly, so you sprinkle fine sand and tap the page until the letters dull and hold. To your right rest tally staves, notched in pairs and split lengthwise so that one half stays with the convoy and the other half remains with you. Their matching bites a mute promise against amnesia. You count coins by weight on a small balance, setting out pebbles and clipped bits of metal as temporary markers before sweeping everything into the appropriate coffer. Each entry receives a date, a place of origin, and a code for the lot that marries coin to cargo, and before the ink dries, you are already calling for the next crate to be pried open. Roots make their own music in the ledgers, and you follow them as if tracing a chant. Donors from Poitou send 5 chests by way of La Rochelle to Messina, where the convoy changes hands after the straits, then again at Cyprus when the winds fall and hulls are lightened for the last reach to Acre. Champagne's gifts arrive under a different set of marks, bundles bound in twine dyed with weld, tied off with small knots described in the letter of advice that rides ahead of the cargo. Venetian and Genoese captains present their manifests before a plank touches the quay, a recital of tonnage and bales and barrels that you copy, annotate, and test against what is brought ashore. Crossbow bolts tied 10 to a sheaf come up from the holds in neat, oiled bundles that clack softly on the trestle as you count. Barrel hoops stamped with the lion of St. Mark ring, like thin bells when set down. Bales of linen bandage cloth, owed to the Hospitallers under a prior agreement, are marked with their cross and stacked separately, while sacks tagged for forward depots near the siege lines receive a red smear so the carters do not confuse destinations. Seals and cords stand between order and confusion, and you check them as you check weights. Receipts and warrants come with 2 slits in the lower parchment, a narrow strip threaded through to hold a pendant seal, the wax bearing the Templar device pressed firm by a matrix that has warmed in someone's hand. Where the business is delicate, or the sum large, a counter-seal of a trusted officer is impressed beside the first, smaller and sharper, its edge scarred in such a way that a false strike looks wrong even to a tired eye. Cords dyed in simple colors run through holes in crate lids and through the slits of accompanying schedules, so the paper and the wood share a fate. When the cord is cut, both tell you that someone has intervened. On the table, you lay a receipt beside its crate, trace cord to cord, seal to seal, and only then break the wax with the tip of a knife, and the little twist you have repeated 1,000 times. The sound is as soft as bread, and the wax leaves a crescent on the blade that you rub away with a thumb as you read the contents against the manifest. In good light, and with the careful quiet of a morning not yet interrupted by petitions, the chain from hand to hand is almost visible. The first wrong notes appear small enough to excuse, but you mark them all the same. A weight figure in the margin of a folio has been scratched, thin and rewritten, the old numerals barely a ghost beneath the new, the different hand forming a 7 with a slant that is not used in your house. A receipt cites the measuring stones at the St. Nicholas Quay, yet the man who swore the statement unloaded at the Venetian pier where the captains insist on their own set of standard weights. The numbers do not disagree loudly, but they do not sing together either. On 2 crates the counter-seal you expect is absent, and in its place the main seal is oddly shallow, as if pressed when the wax was too cold, or the matrix not the one customarily used by your treasurer. A tally stave half in your bin, and half from the convoy matches for the count of linen bales, but the sheaves of bolts noted in the margin do not appear on the tally at all, as if hurried hands omitted them and trusted you not to see. You take up the split stick, press the halves together, and feel how the notches meet along the break. The fit is true, but the numbers on the page have learned to wander. With each small inconsistency, the line of custody blurs like ink in mist. Crates and coins remain within your reach, but the trail runs outward, and you follow it across the docks without leaving your table. You copy lot numbers from the manifests and from your own notes, then check them against lists that come in with scouts from the siege lines. Little bits of thin parchment passed along by men who bargain for biscuits during quiet hours. On one such scrap appear the same marks you assigned to sacks of hard bread 2 weeks ago, now noted in a hand that names a market outside the walls where stale biscuit and horseshoes cross between camps when arrows rest. Another list mentions barrel hoops with a lion stamp, and next to it a price, as if someone is selling the iron before the barrels are quoted for your wine. You set that list beside your cartulary and see the missing counter-seal again, and the altered 7, and the cord that was cut with more haste than care, and the picture that forms is unadorned. Donors' golden arms vanish between quay and camp, and some of what vanishes returns wearing another man's notation. You do not know yet whose hand pushes the trade along, whether a clerk with debts or a trader with a bribe, but the gaps lie where trust should be thickest. In this half-siege and half-marketplace, records carry weight until they do not, and the work of the day becomes deciding which marks to believe and which to set aside. You take the ledgers out to the keys because paper alone will not admit the truth, and you prefer to weigh ink against breath and daylight. The harbour moves in slow, granular labour. Weighers in striped caps call figures while cranes turn on creaking pivots and drop slings of grain with a puff of dust. Under awnings stretched with rope and patience, notaries write in neat chancery hands, dipping pens with the deliberation of priests, while customs clerks murmur dues into tablets and press stamps into wax. You follow the chain of custody with your finger, from ship manifest to customs docket to the warehouse tally, and you let the salt air dry each page as if time itself will set the ink. The numbers are steady until they are not, and the small breaks are where men make their wages. A chest recorded as received, a seal impression missing, a total rounded to the comfort of someone's purse. You keep your voice level because ports have long memories, and the work here runs on continuity. Even in siege, Acre behaves like Acre. Half blockade, half bazaar, it obeys the habits of its ledgers as much as the orders of its princes. The Italian fondaci form the city's vertebrae, and you walk their arcades to understand how disputes bend without breaking. The Venetians keep a compound like a small republic, rooms for factors and scribes, warehouses in line, a chapel tucked behind a courtyard where masts lean over the roof tiles, and their consul admits you with a courteous glance at your mantle. In these houses the consuls arbitrate quarrels among their own, set the fees for storage and freight, and declare which weight will count when a bale is not what it claims to be. You ask for the manifest that should show 2 chests of silver deniers bound for your house, and a Venetian factor produces it with hands that smell faintly of resin and wool. On the ship's list, 2 chests stand in a tidy Latin line. In the warehouse book, the entry has divided like bacteria into 3 smaller packages with altered tallies and new chalk marks on their lids. He explains that the split was for convenience of carriage and safety, a common practice when stevedores fear a dropped load, and his words are almost convincing because a portion of them is true. You request to see the seals that accompanied the split, and when he cannot find the impressions, you make a note, not a scene. The consul's face has the impassivity of a man who arbitrates every hour. Along the docks, the story is more physical, and you let your questions follow the ropes from hand to beam. Porters paid by the load tell you what everyone knows but seldom writes. Bribes pass as docking fees, and a coin laid on the rope buys a berth closer to the crane, and the eye of the clerk grows generous when the day is long. A foreman shows you a steelyard, the iron arm nicked with use, and the sliding counterweight that creeps like a pilgrim along its notches. A thumb pressed here, a notch misread there, and a sack sheds a little weight without spilling a grain. You look at nested cup weights that nestle like bronze seeds, and you ask which rattle the clerk uses at this table. The reply is a shrug and a patronym, because the rattle of this key is not the rattle of Tyre and never the rattle of Alexandria, and the difference is where profit lives. A customs man explains, with the dignity of routine, that an overfull sack at dusk becomes a kindness toward the next dawn's ledger, and that a delayed stamp at the customs table is as eloquent as a refusal if you know how to read it. In a corner where the wind smells of nets, fishermen trade their catch on days that have been quietly blessed by both camps. Siege is hunger, but it is also habit, and small boats move under flags that mean permission for an hour. The dalals, the brokers, step between languages and loyalties with bare feet and quick arithmetic, and you watch one carry a sample of pepper toward a tent where a scribe waits with 2 currencies in mind. The paper trail bends back toward your own house, and you learn to keep your face as flat as the vellum. In a petty cash book for pack animals, you find a notation in the hand of a brother you know by his looped capitals, recording a payment from a dockside intermediary whose name appears in the Venetian factor's margin. On a receipt for cloth bandages, a hospitaler clerk's hand has written over a figure and left a faint original beneath, like a conscience peeking through. The correction is small, and it moves enough coin to buy a quiet cart. A hospitaler sergeant, hard-eyed but not unkind, hints that your men have been replacing fine linen with a lower-grade cloth in some deliveries, and he leaves the suggestion on the air like steam rising from a washing tub. You do not argue about lint and linen bleaching, about the difference between the soft Egyptian weave and the coarse stuff cut near Tripoli. Such debates raise voices and settle nothing. Instead, you note the order number and the weight, and you think about how a spool can lose a finger's width at every cut and still arrive ribboned in virtue. Neither order is clean, and the revelation comes not as a strike, but as a quiet page turned, the sort of page you would rather not read aloud. The city's math teaches you to listen for fraud as a series of gentle adjustments, not as a single blow. A ship's manifest lists 2 chests because that is how the sender understands his gift, and a warehouse splits them because that is what men with shoulders must do when ropes fray and hooks slip. The problem enters when the split draws new numbers around it like a tide line. In a room of clerks, a discounted freight rate appears as a favor passed to a friend in a lean season, and a delayed stamp becomes a tool to shake loose another coin. None of it requires a dagger, only a pen. You watch a customs table shift its standard for an afternoon, adopting the lighter rattle a notary once used in Bari, and the change makes a load of sugar carry a little more moonlight than weight. Currencies converse across the day, silver deniers counted in heaps, Byzantine bezants named in habit even when clipped, Ayyubid dirhams passing like whispers through a broker's fingers. You record exchange rates because paper is the only language that will admit them all. Near the Strand, an intermediary with a green headscarf moves between camps, and you do not need to be told what he carries. Siege survives on such men when pride is not looking. You keep your tone measured, because this is bureaucracy under canvas, and you are here to move numbers back into alignment with the world without pretending that the world will ever be plumb. By late light, you return to the Venetian compound to close the loop on the split chests, and you tell the factor that you will record the division with a note that the seals were missing. He does not protest, and in his silence you hear agreement that the best outcome is the one that returns the figures to an equilibrium everyone can recite without coughing. A notary under the awning copies your remark in a careful line, and the consul nods, already turning to a quarrel over a bale of saffron that has weighed 3 different amounts in a single day. On your way back along the quay, a porter tips his cap with a hand still powdered by flour, and a hospitaller sergeant raises 2 fingers in an acknowledgment that carries neither apology nor threat. You pause by the customs table to watch a stamp sink into wax. When it lifts, the impression is clean, and the clerk smiles because his day has balanced at last. You have matched ink to voices and found them equally human, equally weighty, and equally prone to drift unless held to a beam. The siege continues, the market breathes, and your ledger feels heavier in your hands as if it has inhaled the city's dust and decided to keep it. In the back room of the Venetian Fondaco, you put the last errant column beside a notary's register that lists only sums and ships, and the figures finally hold still. The notary's hand is neat and practiced, recording literage, pilotage, and warehouse night watch, but never a patron's name, never a seal, only numbers that echo those missing from your rolls. You test them aloud under your breath, matching a vanished mark of gold here to a line of expenses for a lighter there, and the arithmetic walks in step. Heat presses through the lime-washed wall, the smell of tar and hemp rope coming in from the quay, and ink dries to a shine that betrays a recent correction. A clerk brings you a jar of water and does not ask questions, because the Fondaco is a world where questions are coin, and coin is breath. You turn a page and see how a sum that should have landed in the temple's chest instead sinks into the harbour's small charges, the kind that few knights would read, and fewer would contest. The discrepancy that began as a missing seal impression now sits in front of you as a line of charges dockside, and the trail becomes a corridor that leads out of this room into the spaces between armies. The pattern you read is not merely theft, but diversion, a current pulled from the main channel to feed a hudna arranged outside the proclamations of princes. The word is Arabic and practical, a truce that is not a treaty, a pause at the edge of the siege where archers lower their bows after sunset and water carriers move between fires with skins on their shoulders. With such a pause, surgeons can work by lamplight without a war cry to scatter their instruments, and beasts can be watered without bolts hissing down the causeway. Commanders debate, and preachers thunder, but the night passes quieter, and the coppers spent on bread and bandage are not buried with their purchasers by dawn. None of this sits easily with rules written for clarity rather than compromise, and you know the Templar statutes and papal legates would not bless private talk with Saladin's captains. Pride weighs on both your own house and the Hospitallers, and weakness has a price no ledger can safely carry in daylight. Yet the sums line up with the logic of a pause that saves stores, men, and patience, and the numerals do not blush when you add them. You track the pathway coin by coin through hands that rarely sign their names, and it begins at a donor's chest that is opened under the polite pretext of assay. The steward lifts a handful of bezants to be tested for weight and fineness, and in the time it takes to measure, several are exchanged for clipped deniers that pass quickly without being counted again in strong sunlight. A notary writes a fee for literage, small boats hired to move casks ashore, and the fee is just large enough to swallow those bright absences without raising voice or eyebrow. The replacement deniers will pay honest wages to porters, which makes the service ledger look proper, while the missing gold moves quietly to a Syrian Christian broker who has kin in both camps and letters in 2 languages. In his hands, coin becomes coin, bezants recast as local currency indistinguishable once mixed into the stream of market payments near the fishmongers' stalls by the sea gate. At dawn, outside St. Nicholas Gate, where watchmen call the hour from the parapet, a purse passes from the broker to a man who keeps no livery and wears the unremarkable brown of a stable assistant. By noon, no one can take those coins apart again and find the faces they once paid, and the night's agreed silence arrives as if by weather. Your own books explain how the trail disappears, because missing seal impressions and falsified weights do not only mask private pockets, but smooth the purchase of time. Wax is warmed and reapplied so that an imprint seems unbroken. A lead seal is swapped with one cast from the same mold, but crimped on a slightly different cord, and a sack weighs true only when placed on the scale that has been filed to heel light. A counterweight with a clipped heel becomes the accomplice of a careful scribe, and a half-pound declared here makes room for a half-pound missing there. Numbers are adjusted by 10s and 20s, never by hundreds, and those who want to sleep make peace with the kind of error that looks like careless counting. A brother whose conscience leans toward the field rather than the chest signs a receipt he does not read closely, and a Venetian procurator stamps a docket that makes the line of boats look like a pageant of routine. Each small adjustment supports the next like bricks in a low wall, and the wall keeps rain off the heads of men you count by the dozen in the muster lists. When you replay the transport sheets and port tallies against the Fondaco register, the sum does not end in a villa or a velvet sleeve, but dissolves into an interval where patrols wave each other to pass in the dim. You set this finding within the ordinary tools of the war, because truces and ransoms sit beside siege engines as customs of this age. Captives are redeemed for money or exchanged at the line. Markets reopen under flags of truce on saints' days, and porters carry figs and onions across boundaries that would be mortal at noon. Venetian, Pisan, and Genoese merchants keep stalls arranged by nation, and their ledgers accept any coin that holds its weight, so long as the scales and officers agree. Heralds step forward with staffs and words memorized from long practice, and safe conducts are read aloud in camp like prayers with prices attached. Yet to show such accommodation would invite charges of softness, and the legates who bless banners would not endorse a private hudna purchased out of crusade arms. Your own rule binds you to obedience and forbids pacts not ordered by your superiors, while the Hospitallers fear the stain of bargaining with enemies when their name promises care without fear. The sums that vanish behind false seals and tilted scales fund the absence of alarm for a few hours more each night, and your ledger balances lives against coins with the same steady pen you use for oats and lamp oil. Dawn seeps into the counting room like thin ink through parchment, and you stand with the counterfeit pages laid out in a neat, incriminating fan. The altered manifests give bows to ships that never sailed, talons of quills scratching in names with careful flourishes that mimic your own hand too closely. The duplicate receipt lacks its counter-seal, a smooth oval where the impression should be, as if absence itself were a kind of wax. Alongside lie the notes that could unpick the whole weave, sums given to an intermediary for a hush along the lines, where scouts trade nods instead of arrows, and carts pass in moonlight. You have been ordered to be silent, to let the machine grind forward with its teeth cleaned of grit. You do not give speeches, you weigh consequences like ingots balanced on the beam. Revelation promises clarity and brings ruin in the same breath, and you rehearse its arithmetic in your head as the kettles outside begin to clatter. If you unroll these proofs before the masters, word will seep back to the cloisters and across the sea, and donors in the West will begin to count their alms as losses rather than offerings. Venetian and Pisan shippers will harden their terms, tightening credit, insisting on cash advances in coin that clinks on the planks before a bale moves, or else they will let hulls sit idle with hatches barred. The rivalry with the Hospitallers will harden from muttering to accusation, and the hospital's bailiffs will arrive with lists of names, prepared to read them out where all can hear. Commanders will forbid any local truces as if vows can stop the tides, enforcing nights of raids and saps and countersaps, and every morning will be a counting of bodies and broken spearheads along the walls. The siege will grow raw again, a rope pulled back and forth until it frays, and the markets will thin as merchants edge away from a harbour that no longer hums but groans. Concealment offers order, not purity, and you tally its advantages with the same dry precision. If you close your hand over the proofs, the columns can be made to meet. Losses will be the sort that every quartermaster knows, and no auditor can contest. The unofficial truce can be allowed to fade as the convoys gather, as if a change in the wind ended it rather than a coin across a table, and the next campaign season will open with cartwheels turning and pack mules braying. The order's credibility will stand long enough to support new levies, new subscriptions, new barrels of iron heads for bolts, new bundles of bowstrings tarred against mildew. Prices will remain within the range you have learned to work with, and Italian captains will keep to their schedules, taking on timber and salt fish without wringing your purse in both hands. Peace bought in rumour will leave no mark on banners, only a slightly different rhythm at the gates, and this ledger will show what the eye wants to see: balance, movement, purpose. The decision is made with flint and breath, not with oaths, and the brazier takes the first page as if it has waited all night. The counterfeit manifests curl quickly, letters blackening and turning to lace, before collapsing into powder that smudges your fingers when you stir the coals. The duplicate receipt protests in silence, seal wax blistering, imprint softening until the device of the temple is a melted blur, and then nothing at all. The notes about the intermediary crisp at the edges and vanish line by careful line, leaving the faint scent of lamp oil and resin in the little room. You do not look up to see if anyone is watching. The only witnesses here are ash and the stubborn knot in the cord around the ledger's spine. When the last scrap falls inward, you tap the rim, and the brazier answers with a quiet fall of embers, as if closing a chest. New pages go where the old have been, and the work begins with the knife. You cut slips of parchment to size, square corners by habit, and rub a piece of pumice lightly over the surface so the ink will take and not bloom into the fibres. With a lead point you rule the columns, a merchant's grid that turns confusion into neat sums, and you prick the margins so that each line of figures will keep to its lane. Warm wax pools on 2 and not 3 places, and you press the Templar seal into it with a steady hand and a quick lift, leaving a crisp impression that matches every other entry on this folio. You retabulate weights, subtracting turre for sacks and barrels, and you note that slopping and spillage account for the missing measure of oil and wine. In the margin you write the truth that will be believed. A chest of deniers was reminted into Byzance at the moneyer's bench, with fees, waste, and exchange spread recorded as loss, and you add a notation that the rate was customary and witnessed. Figures follow like steps on a road, each placed to bear the weight of the next. Bar iron is listed as repacked to avoid rust, with breakage written off under usage during unloading, a familiar phrase that draws no comment. The purchase of bowstrings is divided between Genoese and local hemp, with a surcharge explained as the cost of drying racks after rain, the kind of small nuisance that gnaws at budgets and rarely at consciences. Freight is broken down into boatmen's hire to bring lighters from the roads to the quay dues paid to the commune, and porterage inside the walls, all stamped and initialed where required. A batch of quarrels travelling under hospitaller guard is entered as delivered to the city magazine, rather than to a command tent, and the receipt is copied neatly with the proper counter-seal number filled in from yesterday's archive. You bind the new leaves into the ledger with fresh thread, close the boards, and tie the cords in a double knot you can undo at a word, as if honesty might one day need to be unrolled again. Then you sand the last wet line, blow gently, and the ink sets like a vow. Outside, Acre goes on in its half-siege, half-market rhythm, and you make your entries match that beat. You send a runner to the Venetian Fondaco to note that the barges will load at noon, and the captain may collect his fee in cut silver or in gold if he prefers, and you mark both options in the ledger with a slash and a dot. The hospitaller clerk arrives for a countersignature, and you greet him with the nod of men who have both seen too much night work, passing between you a sheet that says nothing of the more delicate traffic. A scribbled complaint from a mason about lime deliveries is folded under a tally of arrow fletchings. Both are answered with the same pen, one stern, one soothing. You mark a pass for muleteers to take a side gate at dusk, the pathway that has become a custom these last quiet nights, and you copy the permission in your book as if it were an old regulation. When the bell sounds tierce, you close the chest that holds the money scales, and your reflection in the copper bowl is shallow and wavering, like a face glimpsed in harbour water. The larger time keeps its own accounts, and you take a moment to write that, too, in the privacy of thought. King Richard is not here. He will not arrive until the next year, when the banners of England and the cross of St. George will flap over these same stones. Philip of France will come and go within a season, his presence and departure the kind of entries that resist categorization, too heavy to place under simple headings like arrival or expense. Acre will fall after a long siege that grinds and pauses and grinds again, and the songs later will be about kings and standards and a gate forced at last, not about the slow drips of oil and coin that made the pushing possible. Your role is not taken at the breach, but here in the counting of sacks and the smoothing of figures, in the choice to let a temporary peace glide away unnamed, so that carts can roll when the ground is dry. The crusade will march again, because its paper moves with it, and when anyone in some later quiet asks what the numbers said, the ledger that survives will show order where there was compromise, and the story it tells will balance. Night withdraws like a careful scribe lifting a pen, and you sit with your hands quiet, palms smudged with the same ink that steadies armies. The room breathes with the settling of warm timber and the faint salt of the harbour. Outside, Acre softens from clatter to hush. Rigging taps, masts, and distant hooves sound like remembered thunder, not the promise of another march. You look at the wax cooling on a seal and think about how a single emblem can still an argument the way a shield stills an arrow. The world loves symbols, crosses and crescents, lions and eagles, but you have learned that the line between them is as thin as a ruled margin, easily drawn, easily moved. In this city of half-siege, half-market, where Venetian coin meets Syrian grain and pilgrims move beside mercenaries, you find calm in the arithmetic of need. Bread to mouths, water to skins, iron to hands that will lift it. The numbers do not boast. They ask only to be balanced. From the Temple Mount long ago you were taught to keep watch, not only the road, but the soul that walks it. Here, at the edge of the sea in the late 12th century, watching means noting whispers at a key, the tilt of a trader's smile, the weight of a purse that suddenly hangs too light. You have learned that mercy can travel under plain cloth, and that justice sometimes requires a hood to pass unchallenged. It is not a grand truth. It is the sort that fits in a ledger column, small and exact. A gull cries once, drowsy and late. A breeze folds the candle's flame, and your shadow leans and straightens over parchment the colour of old bone. The city's mingled prayers, Latin hymns, soft Greek, the call carried from beyond the lines, blur into one long breath that drifts through the shutters. You have seen how men gather them into banners, and also how, in the end, each voice is just a thread in the same warm air. You close the cover of your book. Cloth on wood, a gentle sound. The clasp finds its catch. In that simple click there is a harbouring, of numbers, of decisions, of the quiet you have made inside the clamour. Tomorrow will ask again. It always does. But tonight belongs to the measured heart, steady as a scribe's hand. You lie back on the cot, the scent of wax and leather fading into the dark. Beyond the wall, the sea keeps its patient count, wave after wave. Breathe with it. Let the tide of the city fall away until all that remains is the soft assurance that balance can be kept, at least for one more night